It's strange how quiet the mornings have become. I wake up before the sun, the same way I always did, but now, there's no reason to rush. No school bags to pack. No breakfast plates waiting to be filled. Only the sound of the clock ticking on the wall, reminding me that time hasn't stopped, even if everything else has. I sit by the window with my cup of tea. The steam rises slowly, just like it did years ago, but the laughter that once filled this room is gone. Sometimes I can almost hear it, echoes of little feet running across the floor, giggles coming from the hallway, my husband's voice asking for another cup of tea. I close my eyes, and, for a moment, they're all still here. Then the silence returns. Heavy. Familiar. Like an old blanket I never asked for but can't take off anymore. I never thought silence could be this loud. When my children were young, I used to dream of quiet mornings. I thought it would mean peace, rest, and time for myself. But now, quiet feels like distance. It feels like being forgotten. I look at the family photo hanging above the dining table. It's slightly tilted, I've fixed it a dozen times, but somehow, it always leans to one side. My husband's smile still looks the same in that picture. The kids are all around us, faces shining with mischief and joy. That day, I remember, they kept fighting over who would sit in the front row. I scolded them, but I was laughing inside. Back then, I thought those days would never end. How foolish I was. How quickly time teaches us the truth. I still cook for two sometimes, out of habit. I still fold an extra blanket when it rains, though there's no one to use it. Old habits, I guess, are the last things to leave a mother. Sometimes, my daughter calls. Her voice is always rushed, "Ma, I'm busy, I'll call later." Later never really comes. But I tell her it's fine. I always say it's fine. Because that's what mothers do, we pretend silence doesn't hurt. Last week, a bird flew into the kitchen and got stuck. It fluttered around, confused, bumping against the walls until it found the open window again. I watched it fly away, and I thought, maybe I'm like that bird. Maybe I've stayed inside too long, holding on to old sounds and old memories, afraid to fly into the world beyond my window. Still, every morning, I whisper a quiet prayer, let them be happy. Let them remember home. Because even if this house is silent now, it once laughed with children. And that laughter, no matter how long ago, still lives somewhere deep inside these walls, and inside my heart. I live in a small town where everyone knows everyone, where people still wave from their porches and children chase the ice cream truck every evening. Our house sits at the end of Maple Street, with its pale blue walls and a white fence my husband painted himself. The paint has faded now, but sometimes when I walk by it, I can still smell the faint scent of that summer day when he finished the last coat, sweat dripping down his brow, smiling as if he'd built us a castle. Back then, our home was full of noise and motion. The front door never stayed shut, kids running in and out, neighbors stopping by, the dog barking for attention. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. And every corner of it was alive with love. I remember how mornings began. The sound of the kettle whistling, the radio playing softly in the background, the smell of toast. My husband, Rajan, would sit by the table reading the newspaper, always frowning at the headlines but smiling at me over the rim of his glasses. Our son, Arjun, was the mischievous one, always running late, always searching for the other shoe. And our daughter, Mira, the quiet, thoughtful, helping me pack lunches while humming some tune she made up herself. Those were the years that smelled of soap and sunlight. I'd hang clothes outside on the line and watch them sway gently in the wind while the children's laughter carried from the yard. Rajan would come home from work with a tired face but a warm heart, sitting down for dinner before asking the kids about their day. I didn't realize it then, but those small questions, did you finish your homework? Who did you play with? Were the threads that kept our family stitched together. On weekends, we'd go to the market. Mira would hold my hand, and Arjun would trail behind, pretending to be bored but secretly excited for the sweets stall. We couldn't afford much, but somehow, we always had enough food, enough laughter, enough dreams. Every Sunday, the house smelled of Rajan's favorite curry and incense from the small altar near the window. He'd put on old songs, the kind that made you feel both happy and sad at once, and hum along while I cooked. Sometimes he'd sneak behind me, wrap his arms around my waist, and whisper, "Someday, when the kids are grown, it'll just be us. We'll travel, see the world." I used to laugh and tell him, "Let's see if you can survive even one day without the kids fighting in the background first." We thought we had forever. But life has its quiet way of reminding you that nothing stays the same. The kids grew up faster than I expected. The toy cars disappeared from under the couch. The school bags became suitcases. And the laughter, that bright, untamed laughter, slowly turned into quick phone calls, polite messages, and long silences. Rajan passed away 5 years ago. It was winter then. The town was wrapped in fog, and our home felt smaller than ever. I still remember holding his hand in the hospital room, his eyes half closed but peaceful. He whispered, "Take care of yourself, and forgive easily, okay?" Those were his last words. Simple, like the man himself. Forgive easily. I didn't understand what he meant then. But I think now, after all these quiet years, I do. After his funeral, Mira stayed for a few weeks. She cooked, cleaned, made tea for the neighbors who came by. She's always been responsible, more mature than her years. Arjun came too, but he left early, said he couldn't stand the hospital smell still lingering in the house. I didn't blame him. Everyone grieves differently. When they both returned to their lives, I told them I'd be fine. And I was, or at least, I told myself I was. The days felt longer, but I filled them with chores. I tended to the garden, fed the stray cats, and started knitting blankets I never finished. Every evening, I'd sit by the window and watch the sky change colors, thinking of Rajan and all the little moments we'd shared. The way he'd whistle after dinner. The way he'd fall asleep mid-sentence on the couch. The way he'd always reach for my hand when we crossed the street, even after 30 years of marriage. People in town were kind. Mrs. Sharma next door brought me food sometimes. The postman, Ravi, always asked if I was doing all right. In small towns, loneliness is noticed, even if it's not spoken about. But no matter how kind the world was, the house still felt empty. I'd find myself talking aloud, not to anyone in particular, just to fill the space. Some days, I'd hear my own voice echo back and feel embarrassed, even though there was no one to hear. Then one afternoon, Mira called. Her voice was warm, but there was something careful about her tone, the kind you use when you're trying not to upset someone. "Ma," she said, "why don't you come stay with us for a while? You'll get to see the kids. There's more space now." I hesitated. I didn't want to be a burden. But she insisted. And so, with my small suitcase and a heart full of mixed feelings, I left the house on Maple Street, the house that had held my whole life, to live with my daughter and her family in the city. I told myself it would be fine. That maybe being around family again would bring back that laughter I missed so much. But deep down, something told me it wouldn't be that simple. When I first moved into Mira's home, it felt like stepping into another world. The city air was heavy with dust and noise. Cars honked endlessly, people hurried everywhere, and tall buildings blocked the sunlight. I missed my little town, the slow mornings, the sound of birds, the smell of wet earth after rain. But I told myself, change is good. Rajan would have wanted me to adjust. Mira and her husband, Sanjay, were kind. They'd prepared a small room for me at the back of the house. It had a window that opened to the neighbor's wall, but I could still see a small patch of sky if I leaned out far enough. On the first night, Mira brought me a cup of warm milk, the same way I used to do for her when she was little. She smiled and said, "Now it's my turn to take care of you." Her words touched me deeply, though I noticed how tired her eyes looked. The city had made her softer in some ways and harder in others. Her children, Arav and Tara, were sweet, polite, but distant. They called me a Dottie, but I could tell they didn't know what to say to me. Their world was made of phones, screens, and fast things. One evening, I tried telling them an old story about when their mother was a girl, how she once fell into the pond chasing a frog. They laughed for a moment, then quickly went back to their tablets. I smiled, pretending it didn't hurt. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, I began to notice the rhythm of the house. Everyone woke up early, rushing through breakfast, barely speaking. Sanjay worked long hours, always glued to his laptop. Mira juggled work, kids, and house chores like a clock that never stopped ticking. I tried to help folding clothes, watering plants, even cooking once in a while. But Mira often said gently, "Ma, you should rest. You've done enough all your life. Let us handle things." I nodded. But what she didn't understand was that doing things was how I felt alive. When your hands are busy, your mind doesn't wander too far into memories. Sitting still makes the heart ache louder. Sometimes, I'd walk around their apartment building just to feel the wind. The guard downstairs would greet me kindly. The children from other flats would smile, but their mothers would pull them away politely. I was invisible in a place full of people. One Sunday, I cooked Rajan's favorite curry, the one with mustard seeds and coconut milk. I thought it would make everyone happy. But when Mira came home and smelled the kitchen, her face tightened a little. "Ma, we don't eat that much oil anymore," she said softly. "You could have told me. Sanjay's on a diet." Her words weren't harsh, but they sank deep inside me. I quietly packed the leftovers and placed them in the fridge, pretending not to notice that no one touched them later. That night, I sat near the window of my small room and watched the lights of the city flicker. Each one felt like a heartbeat, someone awake, someone alive, and yet I had never felt more alone. I missed the sound of Rajan's voice. I missed the way my home used to creak in the wind. Even the silence there was gentler. The next few months passed in the same quiet rhythm. Sometimes Mira forgot to ask if I'd eaten. Sometimes the children left for school without saying goodbye. It wasn't out of cruelty, just the pace of life. But every small forgetting stitched another layer of distance between us. One evening, Mira's family had guests. Friends from work. Laughter filled the house. I stayed in my room, not wanting to intrude. But I could hear bits of conversation through the half-closed door. One woman asked, "Who lives in the back room?" And Mira replied quickly, almost embarrassed, "Oh, that's just my mother. She prefers her privacy." Just my mother. I don't know why those words hurt so much. Maybe because, all my life, she had been my whole world. And now, in her world, I was just a quiet detail. Later that night, when everyone had left, I walked to the living room to pick up the empty glasses. Mira stopped me. "Ma, don't. I'll clean it tomorrow." I smiled and said softly, "I don't mind helping. It makes me feel useful." She didn't answer. She just nodded, looking guilty. The next morning, I woke up early and made breakfast for everyone, parathas and tea, the way Rajan liked it. When Mira came to the kitchen, she sighed gently and said, "Ma, you don't have to do this. The kids like cereal. We're all fine." I nodded again, but inside, I felt something crumble. It wasn't about food. It was about belonging. About wanting to be part of their morning, part of their life. Then one day, something small, so small it shouldn't have mattered, changed everything. Ariv's school had a family event. Parents and grandparents were invited. I was so excited. I even ironed my best sari and packed a small snack box for him. When I told Mira I wanted to come, she hesitated. "Oh, Ma," she said carefully, "it's mostly for the kids. You'll have to sit for hours. It might be tiring." I smiled, though my heart felt heavy. "It's okay," I said. "I'll manage." She didn't stop me, but she didn't encourage me either. At the school, I sat in the back row, watching Ariv play on stage. He was so full of life, so confident. I clapped harder than anyone else. But when the teacher announced, "Family photo session," Mira stood with her husband and kids. I thought she'd wave me over. But she didn't. She didn't even see me. When the flash went off, I smiled anyway, from the back row, where no one noticed. Later, I walked home alone. The sari felt heavier than ever, dragging slightly against the pavement. By the time I reached home, my eyes were dry. Not from strength, but from emptiness. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, tracing patterns on the glass with my finger. I thought of Rajan again. His last words, forgive easily. But forgiveness is hardest when the people hurting you don't even know they've done it. Days passed, and something between Mira and me quietly changed. I spoke less. She stopped asking small questions. Even our silences felt different now, not peaceful, but fragile. She once asked, "Ma, are you happy here?" And I said, "Of course, Beta." Because that's what mothers say. Even when they're not. One afternoon, I went to the market nearby, just to walk around. There was an old lady selling flowers by the corner. She looked tired, but when I bought a few marigolds, she smiled and said, "You must be far from home. Your eyes look homesick." I didn't know what to say. Maybe she was right. Maybe home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a feeling, one you lose slowly, without realizing. That evening, Mira came home late. Dinner was cold. She looked exhausted, but she tried to smile. "I'm sorry, Ma. Work's been crazy lately." I nodded and said softly, "It's all right. I understand." But inside, I wondered, did she understand what it felt like to eat alone in a house full of people? Then came the day that would change everything, the day of quiet breaking. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, just a few words, spoken without thought, but heavy enough to shatter the silence that had held us together. It was a Sunday afternoon, one of those lazy days when the whole house seemed to sigh with relief after a long week. The air smelled faintly of detergent and sun-dried clothes. Mira was in the kitchen, the children were arguing over a game, and Sanjay sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone. I was folding laundry in my little room, humming softly to myself, an old tune Rajan used to sing. It was a peaceful moment, until I heard my name. Mira's voice carried from the living room, low, but not low enough. "She means well, but sometimes I feel it's too much," she said. Sanjay replied, "She's old, Mira. Maybe she just needs something to do." "I know," Mira said, "but it's hard to explain. Sometimes it feels like I have 3 children to look after." I froze. The shirt in my hand slipped, falling onto the floor. I didn't mean to listen, I really didn't. But her words sank deep, like tiny needles in my chest. 3 children to look after. Was that what I had become? A burden disguised as family? For a long moment, I stood still, hearing only the ticking of the wall clock. It was strange, how silence could suddenly feel so loud. After a few minutes, I picked up the fallen shirt and folded it again, this time more carefully, as if neatness could hide the ache in my heart. That evening, Mira came to my room with a smile. "Ma, we're going out for dinner tonight. Sanjay's office is treating everyone's families. You'll be all right, right? I'll bring something back for you." Her words were kind. They always were. But suddenly, I felt the space between us, wide, like the long road between my old town and this city. I smiled. "Of course, Beta. Go enjoy yourself." And when the door closed behind them, I finally let my shoulders drop. The house was quiet, too quiet. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered to life, one by one. I could hear faint laughter from nearby flats, families together. Clinking dishes, soft music. And there I was, in a room full of stillness, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. For the first time, I realized that sometimes, love doesn't disappear all at once. It fades slowly, like sunlight in winter, retreating inch by inch until you don't notice you're sitting in the cold. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a walk. The air was cool, and the world was still half asleep. I passed by a small temple, where an old man was lighting incense sticks. He smiled and said, "You come here often?" I shook my head. "No, I'm new here." He nodded, then said quietly, "It takes time to feel at home." But it comes, little by little. His words stayed with me. When I returned home, Mira was rushing again, lunchboxes, school bags, phone calls. She barely looked up when she said, "Morning, Ma." I smiled, though she didn't see it. "Good morning, Beta. Don't forget your scarf. It might rain today." She mumbled something, half listening. Later, as I washed the dishes, I found myself staring at my reflection in the window of a faint, blurry, tired. I looked older than I felt. The woman in the glass didn't look like the mother who used to run after children in the garden, or cook feasts during festivals. She looked like someone who had been slowly packed away, carefully, politely, forgotten. That evening, it rained heavily, the kind of rain that blurs everything, the road, the sky, even your thoughts. I made tea for everyone, hoping to share a little warmth, but Mira came home soaked and frustrated. Her umbrella had broken, her meeting had gone poorly, and the children were restless. When I offered her tea, she sighed, "Ma, please, not now. I just need some peace." Her words weren't cruel. They were tired. But I still felt something inside me crumble a little more. I quietly set the cup down and went back to my room that night. As I lay awake listening to the rain, I realized I had stopped expecting things. Not attention, not gratitude, just a small place to feel seen. A few weeks later came the moment that truly broke me, though at the time, it looked like nothing at all. It was Mira's birthday. I spent the whole morning making her favorite sweet, kheer, just like I used to on her birthdays when she was little. I even found some saffron in the cupboard, just to make it special. When she came home from work, the house was decorated. Her friends and colleagues were there. Balloons, music, laughter filled the room. I waited quietly by the kitchen doorway, holding the bowl of kheer in my hands. I thought she would see me, maybe smile, maybe remember. But she was surrounded by people, taking photos, opening gifts. I waited for my moment. Finally, I walked forward and said softly, "Mira, happy birthday, Beta." She turned, surprised. "Oh, Ma. You didn't have to make anything. You should rest." Her friends looked at me politely, but I could sense the awkwardness. I placed the bowl on the table. "It's your favorite," I said. "Just like old times." She smiled quickly and said, "Thank you, Ma." Then she turned back to her guests. A few minutes later, I saw one of her friends tasting it. She smiled politely and said, "It's nice." But no one really ate it. They were busy with pizza and pastries. I went back to my room quietly. For a long time, I sat on the bed, staring at my hands. They smelled of milk and sugar, and a kind of loneliness that no sweetness could cover. That night, after everyone had gone, I heard laughter from the living room. Then silence. Then footsteps. Mira came to my door, gently pushing it open. "Ma, I hope you weren't upset. Everyone loved the kheer, really." I smiled. "Of course, Beta," but I couldn't stop the words that followed. "Do you remember how we used to sing on your birthdays?" She paused. "Yes, Ma. But things are different now. Life's just busy." She kissed my forehead and left, and I sat there, realizing that busy was the new word for distant. The next morning, something inside me shifted. I looked around my little room, the folded clothes. The photo of Rajan, the half-finished knitting basket. For the first time, I didn't feel sad. I just felt still. I made breakfast as usual. When Mira came to the kitchen, I said quietly, "Beta, I was thinking of going to our hometown for a while." She looked up, surprised. "What? But why? You're fine here." "I know," I said. "I just want to see the house again. It's been years." She hesitated. "It's too far, Ma. Who will take care of you there?" I smiled gently. "I've taken care of myself most of my life. I think I'll be all right." She didn't argue, but I could see worry flicker in her eyes. I wanted to tell her that it wasn't about leaving her, it was about finding me again. But words like that are too heavy for tired hearts. So instead, I said softly, "Don't worry. I'll call." A week later, I packed a small suitcase. Just clothes, Rajan's photo, and a few old letters. As I zipped it shut, I felt strangely calm. Mira drove me to the station. The ride was quiet. She asked if I'd be comfortable. I nodded. When we reached, she hugged me, a quick, distracted hug. "Take care, Ma," she said. I smiled. "You too, Beta." As the train pulled away, I watched her figure shrink through the window. For a moment, I wanted her to look back. But she didn't. And that's when I realized, sometimes love means letting go, not to punish, but to protect your heart from quietly disappearing. The rhythmic clatter of the train felt like a heartbeat, mine, steady again after so long. Outside, fields rolled by. I closed my eyes and whispered to Rajan, "I'm coming home." The weeks after that night felt long and quiet. I kept myself busy, tending to the garden, sewing small patches on my old quilt, and sitting by the window, watching people pass by, but inside, I carried a new stillness. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was acceptance. One afternoon, as I was dusting the shelves, I found an old family photo. It was taken during a picnic by the river, my husband grilling corn, my son chasing butterflies, and me holding the picnic basket with a smile I barely recognized now. I ran my finger over their faces and whispered softly, "We were happy once that night." I wrote a letter to my son. Not to blame him. Not to reopen old wounds. But to say thank you, for the years we shared, for the child he once was, and for the life he was now building. I told him that I forgave him, even though he never asked for forgiveness. I told him that I missed him, but I understood. A week later, I placed the letter in the mailbox and didn't expect a reply. Sometimes forgiveness is meant to be silent, given, not returned. But 3 days later, I heard the sound of a car pulling up in front of my gate. I thought it was a delivery van, until I heard a voice, familiar, trembling, and uncertain. "Ma," I froze. I turned slowly, and there he was, my son, standing near the gate, holding a small box. His eyes looked tired, softer than I remembered. For a moment, I didn't move. Neither did he. Then, without saying anything, he walked toward me and placed the box on the table. "Lila made these for you," he said quietly. "Cookies. Your favorite ones." My hands shook as I touched the box. The same smell of butter and sugar that once filled our kitchen years ago drifted through the air. I smiled, tears filling my eyes. "She remembered," I whispered. He nodded. Then, after a long pause, he said, "I'm sorry, Ma. For everything. For not being there. For letting things become like this." I took a slow breath. The hurt was still there, somewhere deep, but the warmth of his presence began to soften it. I placed my hand over his. "You came home," I said. "That's enough." He nodded. Then, after a long pause, he said, "I'm sorry, Ma. For everything. For not being there. For letting things become like this." I took a slow breath. The hurt was still there, somewhere deep, but the warmth of his presence began to soften it. I placed my hand over his. "You came home," I said. "That's enough." Before he left, he hugged me. Not the hurried kind from years ago, but long and trembling, as if both of us were afraid to let go. "Will you come visit next month?" he asked. I smiled, wiping my tears. "You don't even have to ask." As his car disappeared down the narrow road, I felt something I hadn't in years, peace. Not the peace that comes from forgetting, but the kind that blooms from forgiving. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table, opened the box of cookies, and whispered to myself, maybe love never really leaves. It just waits, quietly, like this. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the soft scent of home. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. The silence was softer, like an old friend sitting beside me, no longer heavy with loneliness. I made myself a cup of tea and carried it to the porch. The air was cool, and a gentle mist hung over the small town. From here, I could see the narrow road winding through the trees, the same road my son's car had disappeared down the evening before. I sat there for a long time, listening to the birds and the sound of distant laughter from the neighborhood children walking to school. It reminded me of years long gone, of mornings filled with rushing footsteps, breakfast chatter, and my son's voice calling out, "Ma, where's my lunchbox?" For the first time in years, those memories didn't hurt. They felt like warm sunlight on my skin, something to be grateful for, not something to mourn. I realized something that morning: forgiveness doesn't erase pain. It doesn't change the past. But it allows the heart to rest. It's like opening a window after a long winter and letting in fresh air. Even if the world outside hasn't changed, the room inside feels new. Later that day, I went to the small wooden cabinet near my bed and took out a faded notebook. It was my old diary, pages yellowed, corners bent. I began to write again, for the first time in years. "My son came home today," I wrote. "Not for long. Just long enough for us to say what we couldn't before, and maybe that's all love really needs. A moment of truth, wrapped in silence, and shared over cookies that taste like old memories." When I finished, I closed the notebook and smiled. That evening, as the sky turned orange and pink, I cooked a simple meal: lentils, rice, and a bit of fried onion on top, just the way he liked it as a boy. I set 2 plates on the table, though I was the only one there. Some habits never leave a mother. Before eating, I whispered softly, "Thank you, God, for giving me one more day to love without bitterness." Outside, the wind carried the smell of jasmine through the window. I could almost hear my husband's laugh in the distance, the echo of a young boy running through the house, and the faint clatter of family dinners that once filled these walls. My heart felt full, not because everything was fixed, but because I finally understood something: life is not about perfect endings. It's about gentle returns, about moments when love quietly finds its way back home. And as I sat there under the soft glow of the lamp, I realized that forgiveness isn't a grand act. It's a whisper. A breath. A cup of tea shared in silence. Our home once laughed with children. Then it was silent. But now, it hums again, not with noise, but with peace. And that is enough.